We're on Daf Tes Zayin,
Right.
and we are, let's count down from the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down from the top. Gufa.
Got it.
Okay. Omar Rebbe, just a second. Rebbe Ami Bar Yomi. So this is a Gemara that we had quoted earlier on the previous Amud in the name of Rabbi Ami. Succah Bibloi Kalim Psula. Now, the literal translation of Bloi Kalim is that you have clothing, articles of clothing made out of cloth. And if the cloth is what's called 3 etzbos by 3 etzbos, that's a very small piece of cloth, then it's not a kli. And we'll explain why as we go along. If, on the other hand, it has 3 etzbos by 3 etzbos or more, then it's a kli. And Rabbi Ami here, in this context, is referring to Bloi Kalim. Bloi Kalim in this context means that the cloth disintegrated over the course of time through its use. In today's context, we would say that he put it to the laundry. You send it to the laundry and then it comes back a little bit smaller. So in this case, he ended up with a piece of cloth that's less than 3 by 3 etzbos, which means it's not a kli and it's not makabel tumah. And yet, despite the fact that it's made of flax, which is called gidulo mina aretz, it's produced by the ground, and it's not makabel tumah because it's less than 3 by 3 etzbos. Nevertheless, Rabbi Ami disqualifies it for schach. And this has to be a derabanan because on a deraisa level, it certainly is kosher for schach. So the Gemara first asks, my Bloi Kalim, what is Bloi Kalim? Amar Abaye, Matlanios, she'ein behem shalosh al shalosh. So we're talking about pieces of cloth that are less than 3 by 3. And Omar Abaye clarifies this, and he says that the lo chazyon lo lanim v'lo lashirim. Now, I would read it like this: lo lanim v'kolshkein lo lashirim. I'm just adding a kolshkein, meaning a rich person would not bother with a small patch of cloth that was left from Bloi Kalim, from worn out garments. What's he going to do with it? On the other hand, a poor person, if you've got a piece of cloth and it's made of flax, you don't want to waste it. A poor person wants to use whatever he can, whatever he has. But if it's got 3 by 3 etzbos, then he could use it. Let's say if he wears a pair of jeans. I don't know, are you allowed to use the word jeans, or is that a company name? I don't know. Anyway, well, let's assume it's not a company name, and you'll find it in the dictionary. So he has a pair of jeans, and he rips his jeans. Today, of course, it's in style to wear ripped jeans, but let's say it wasn't so in style. He doesn't want to wear ripped jeans. So he takes a small patch of cloth, and he sews it onto his ripped jeans. But if it's less than 3 by 3 etzbos, then even a poor person, would find no use for such a small patch of cloth. He would throw it out. And therefore, it doesn't have a shem keli. So now it comes out the following, that there's a gewaltige chiddush in Rabbi Ami. He's telling me that even though I have a small patch of cloth that's less than 3 by 3 etzbos, and it doesn't have a shem kli, it's not makabel tumah, on a doraisa level, it's kosher for schach. Nevertheless, the Rabbanan disqualified it. And the reason for that is, and here's the lumdus, this is really, you have to be a brisker lamdan here, that once it had a shem kli, then the Rabbanan said that since the Torah apostles it because it's makabel tumah, a kli is makabel tumah, can't be used as schach. So the Rabbanan say that we maintain and retain the shem kli, as far as psul schach is concerned, even when it's no longer kli. So in Kol Dinei Torah, for example, for Kabbalah's Tumah, this small cloth, a patch that's less than 3 by 3 exposed, would not be makabel tumah. But with regard to Sukkah, Rabbi Ami says, we're going to disqualify it for schach. And the reason for that is because if we allow it to use it when it's less than 3 by 3, then you might mistakenly think, okay, and if it's 3 by 3, I can also use it. But it goes beyond that. It's not just a psychological gzera here. It works with gedarim, with set definitions. And in this case, the definition is that once it had a shem kli, and on a deraisa level was possible for schach, then even paka shem kli, even after the shem kli is gone, it retains that same status of psul schach. And now the Gemara quotes a brisa to support Rabbi Ami. Tanya kavosi Rabbi Ami baratuv Yomi. Machzeles shel shifa v'shel gemi. Now, the word machzeles is kind of a generic term. Literally, it translates as a mat. But the word mat is generic in the sense that a mat could be made up of any number of different substances. And that's how Chazal used the word machzeles to indicate it could be made up, it could be made by any material whatsoever. In this case, the Brisa mentions various materials. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi tells you what these materials are in Old French. So I don't know any French. I don't know any New French. I certainly don't know any Old French. So Rashi's translation doesn't mean a thing to me. In the English translation, it means even less, which is always the case. Whenever I don't know what a word means, the English translation just confuses me further. But basically, it's called a sedge, S-E-D-G-E, or it's called a rush, R-U-S-H. In any event, these are materials that they use to make mats or machzeles. And now the Brisa talks about shirayim. Shirayim, you know, like in the Chassidish Shitij, means leftovers. So you've got leftovers, and afal pi shenifchesu mikishiura, which means that they have less than 3 by 3 etzbos, and they're not makabel tumah, ein mesachechim bohem. You cannot use them as schach. Why not? If it's nifchesa and it doesn't have a shear of gimel al gimel, well, actually, I should be more careful here. I apologize. It's not really gimel al gimel because we're talking about machzeles. And if you take a look at Rashi, which is about 10 lines down from the top of the Amud, Rashi quotes a Mishnah in Kalim, and the Mishnah says that as far as mapot, which is another word in the Mishnah for the word machzeles, is shisha al shisha. In other words, a machzeles is more of a substantial kind of multifunctional kli. It's not just a patch of cloth which you could use, you know, if you rip your jeans. And a machzeles could be used multi-purposes. So therefore, once you have a more significant kind of size to it, meaning shisha al shisha, then it already has a shem machzeles, which is a category unto its own in Kabbalah's Tumah in Hilchas Kalim. But now we're talking about a case of nifchesa. Nifchesa means that it's less than 6 by 6 tfachim. I'm sorry, etzbos, which means that it doesn't have a shem kli. And the brisa here is not addressing the laws of Hilchas Tumah V'Tara. This brisa is addressing the laws of schach. And it tells you that this is pasul l'schach, a mesachechim bohem, even though on a doraisa level, it would be kosher for schach, for two reasons, because it has both conditions. Number one, it grows from the ground. These substances that Rashi interprets in French, are ground grown, like flax. And number two, it's not makabel tumah because it has less than 6 by 6 etzbos. Nevertheless, it's pasul l'schach. So we see clearly that the Rabbanan established that something which once was pasul l'schach and now is nifchasa mishiura, it doesn't have the shear, the minimum shear, then it retains its psul. But Rabbanan, they extended the psul as far as schach is concerned. Now there's a small little tosfos here. Dibra Maschil Delo. Do you see that? It's the second of the wide lines. You have that? So Tosfos wants to know the following. Why does the Brisa make a general assumption that if the machatzeles, the mapot, is very small, then it no longer has a shem kli? That might be true for most people, but Ruvain comes along and he says, you know what? I want to use this machatzeles, even though it's very small, to plug up my my jar. So Tosfos says that the reason why such a consideration is irrelevant is because we invoke a principle which is called batla daito etzel kolon. Now, honestly, again, I'm just expressing my own feeling. I don't know why Tosfos needs to invoke the principle of batla daito etzel kolon. I would have invoked a different principle, and that called shiurim. When there's a shear, and Chazal say that that is the shear, meaning it's not makabel tumah if it's less than a certain shear, a size of a machzeles, then it's less than a shear. I don't know if I have to go as far, but Tosfos wanted to go a little bit further, and he invokes the principle of batla daito kolon. We don't consider your das. You know, Ruvain is the exception, and it's so rare that someone would use such a small mat that the halacha doesn't consider his das as das. Like the Gemara has in Bava Metzia. You remember in Ela Metzias, the guy, you know, he loses his small, his wife's earring at the bottom of the sea, and he's yelling, well, I'm going to find it. You know, I'm going to get a deep sea dive. So the Gemara says, batla daito etzel kolon. We don't consider that. The Brisa now mentions the case of machzeles hakonim. It's made of konim. We said konim many times as reeds. Is gedola misachachim ba, ktana ein misachachim ba. So here we have a very important Rashi. Rashi says gedola misachachim ba. The lav kelihu, the stama l'sichuch. Now, why does Rashi use the word stama over here? Usually, when we use the word stama, what it means is that we could have one explicit situation on one extreme, another explicit situation on the other extreme, and stama is when we don't know neither A nor B. Now, if we're wondering where Rashi got this word stama from, so for that we'd have to turn to Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis, and that's where Rashi got it from. Gemara says, if you take a look, it's about 12 or 13 lines before the end of the Amud on Yud Tes Amud Beis. Ha gufa kasha amid asan l'shchiva mekabelas tuma. The ein misachim ba. Taima dasol l'shchiva. Hastama l'sichuch. V'hadar tani l'sichuch misachim ba. The ein mekabelas tuma. My taima the asol l'sichuch. Hastama l'shchiva. So you see that the Gemara is operating with the following two extremes. One extreme is where he manufactured this machzelas of konim for the express purpose of using it as schach, and then it's kosher l'schach. And the other case is where he designates it for shchiva. He's going to use it as a kind of mattress. And our brisa that we're learning now is going to record a machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer about a machzeles gedola. The Tanna Kama says gedola mesachim bo, ketana ein mesachim bo. If it's a ketana, apparently he designates it for shchiva. But if it's a gedola, he's going to use it for schach. And Rabbi Eliezer Omer, af hi mekabeles tuma, the ein mesachim bo. Even though it's a large mat, too large, I guess, to be used as a mattress in most cases, except for Og Melech HaBashan, Gulliver's Travels, and therefore it is designated as schach. And afi mekabeles tumah. The ein mesachikim. So Rashi has to interpret this machlokas because it doesn't make any sense. What do you mean there's a machlokas? Either he designated it for shchiva or he designated it for sukkah, for schach. What was in his mind when he manufactured this machzelas shel kanin? So Rashi adds the word stama. And herein lies the machlokas between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer. According to the Tanna Kama, in a case of stoma where he didn't have any definite mindset, then we're going to assume that he had in mind l'shem schach, because as we said before, it's a little bit too large of a machzeles to waste it on shchiva, use it as a hammer. Better use it for the schach. It's a large piece and it would really cover your entire sukkah. And Rabbi Eliezer holds no, that in the case of stoma, when he didn't designate it one way or the other, we assume that he wants to use it for a mat. And therefore it's makabel tumah, and therefore it's possible for schach. Okay then. But anyway, the main point of this entire sugya, let's just review it, is that when you have something that originally had a shem kli and it had a definite function, and it was makabel tumah, then according to the principle here of Rabbi Ami, it retains that status, not as far as tumah is concerned, if it gets disintegrated and it's nifchas and it becomes smaller than the shear, but as far as schach is concerned, it retains that original status and it remains posel l'schach. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah speaks about achotet bigadish. So let's just reflect back on the Mishnah. The Mishnah on the bottom of Tezvav and Aleph, achotet bigadish lasos lo sukkah, eina sukkah. Okay. Now let's understand, by way of introduction to the next sugya, what exactly is going on over here. And truth be told, from the Mishnah itself, I wouldn't have known, but from the Gemara, working backwards, I can shed a little bit of light on what's going on in our Mishnah. This Gadish, this haystack, which is mentioned in the Mishnah in Masechet Bava Kama, with regard to the principle of Kimlev the Rabbini, that's not for us, but this Gadish is not standing on the ground. It's a tall haystack, but it may have, this again, I'm just thinking out of the box. It may have sides to it that have like legs. if I could use the terminology, it's suspended in midair. It's not suspended in midair. We're not talking about a magical haystack. But there's some way that this haystack is above ground. And our sugi is going to deal with the question, how high above ground? How far is it from the ground till the bottom of the haystack? Now, when he digs into the haystack and he creates a halal, an open space, that's a problem if he wants to use that open space, that cavity we'll call it, as a sukkah, which means at the top of the haystack, which he didn't dig out, becomes schach. That's tasev v'lo min ha'asur. Because clearly, the top of the haystack, like the rest of the haystack, was not set up as schach. So where's your asiyah, and where did you create schach? Now you dig out the cavity, and the mela automatically, the top of the haystack becomes schach. If you want to sit inside the cavity, or sleep there, eat there. So that's called tasev v'lo min ha'asur. That's possible. However, and here's the but, it's possible, get this, that the entire haystack is schach. How so? Because if, as we said before, I'm going to use this terminology, but obviously you'll understand, don't take me literally. If the schach is suspended in midair, then the very moment he put the schach down on top of this thin air, that itself is an asiyah of a sukkah, providing that the gadish is schach. Okay. So Omer Rav Huna, lo shanu elo she'ein sham halal tefach b'meshech shiva. Aval yesham halal tefach b'meshech shiva. Havi le sukkah. Rav Huna comes up with a fantastical case that we mentioned earlier, that the gadish was placed down on a halal, on empty air. It's, as we said before, it's suspended in midair. How far up from the ground is it? 1 tefach. So what? The answer is that gives the schach, the gadish, a shame ohel. But again, let's be more precise. It's mahil, right? Ohel is a noun and mahil is a verb. Mahil means that it covers an area of empty space and it qualifies as an ohel. Now, how much empty space do you have to have from the bottom, from the floor, up to the in this case, the gadish, or whatever covering you use for an ohel? And this halacha in Masechet Olos, and Tumas Mes Lahavius Atuma, and Lachtzos Min Atuma, that is 1 tefach. It's amazing that a tefach is such a small area, but yet, if you have that empty space of a tefach, then you have a mahil. Now listen to this. Rav Huna is telling us that once you have a mahil, and the gadish now, in its totality, is mahil, then it has a shem schach. So we thought that l'shem schach means, it has to be this, and it has to be that. No, let's not get complicated. All we need is mahil. If it has that quality of mahil, then it has a shem schach. However, wait a second. Who are you fooling over here? You need a mahil which covers a sukkah. Just because you have an airspace of 1 tefach, that's not called a sukkah. For 2 reasons, it's not called a sukkah. Number 1, because it's not wide enough. And number 2, because You need defanos. Halal is not defanos. You need walls. So the answer is, we're going to answer both these questions. Number one, it's not just a halal from the ground to the bottom of the Godish of 1 tefach, but there's also a width to it. And the width is 7 tefachim, which is the minimum size, as far as width is concerned, of a small sukkah. So now the entire Godish becomes schach. Why? Because it's mahil on an area that could be a sukkah. But wait a second, who are you fooling? You only have the width of a sukkah. You don't have the height of a sukkah. Here's the lumbus. Rav Huna says the height of a sukkah is not a t'nai, it's not a condition in the shem schach, but rather the shem defanos. And Rashi says, I'll prove it to you. Because what happens if you put schach down on a sukkah that's only 9 tefachim high? And we had a sugya back on Daf Daled called chokek. Chokek means he digs into the ground to get that extra tefach, to add it to the 9 tefachim. So you now have a halal of 10 tefachim, and the schach is now 10 tefachim on top. What happened to Tasav Lom and Asud? How can you dig down and create kosher schach at a posel schach? You have to put the schach back on. Right? Nanua and all that stuff. The answer is, the schach itself was kosher when he put it on 9 tefachim, and for that matter 1 tefach. But he needs defanos. The defanos have to have the height of 10 tefachim. So now what he does is, when he digs below the ground, he is adding and extending the defanos. That's not a problem of Tasa Lom and Asur. And therefore, by equation, in the case that we're dealing with here of Rav Huna, which we'll see is a brisa, when he digs a cavity, what he's really doing by digging is he's creating defanos. He's raising the height of his sukkah. But the schach itself had a shem schach once it was covering a tefach. Anya nami hachi, and we learned in the brisa, chotet b'kodesh, lasos lo sukkah, harezu sukkah. What does that mean? V'anan tanan eina sukkah. How do we reconcile this brisa with that Mishnah? Elav shmamina, kidarav huna shmamina. The Mishnah is talking about a case where there is no halal tefach, and the Godish is being laid down on the ground. And the brisa, which says that it is a sukkah and it's valid, is talking about a case where he lays it down on a tefach of airspace. And now the Gemara has a different girsa, different transmission, but it's identical in content. Ika de rami le mirme snan achotet begodish lasos lo sukkah. Eino sukkah. But Tanya rezu sukkah. Rav Huna lo kasha kan b'sheyesham halal tefach b'meshach shiva. So it's got an airspace of 1 tefach and it has a width from side to side of shiva tefachim. And b'she'ein sham halal tefach b'meshach shiva, and therefore the schach, the Godish is not schach, it's not mahil, and therefore you have a problem of taseh v'lo min ha'asur. So again, either Rav Huna made the statement up front, or Rav Huna made the statement in order to reconcile the contradiction between the brisa and our Mishnah. But either way, it's the same bottom line. Now Tosfos says that's Tosfos Dibra Maschil Avol. If you see towards the bottom of the Amud, that this Rav Huna seems to be Rav Huna l'shitasa. He's consistent with his opinion above on Daf Daled in the sugya of Sukkah tachas Sukkah, because in that sugya, the Gemara mentions 3 different opinions on the following issue. When is the bottom Sukkah psula? If the 2 schachs the top one and the bottom one are very close, then we see it as one schach. So it's not sukkah tachas sukkah. The Torah says sukkahs without a vav, and not sukkos in the plural. So one day says that if there's a tefach, as small of a space between the top schach and the bottom of one tefach, then the bottom sukkah is psula of sukkah tachas sukkah. Another man Yomer says you need 4 tefachim, and there's a third man Yomer, which is Shmuel. He says 10 tefachim, the height of a sukkah. The first man Yomer who says 1 tefach is Rav Huna. And now Tosfos says, you see, Rav Huna is very consistent, because here, in order to give the shem schach, he needs that the schach be mile over a halal of 1 tefach, which is exactly what Rav Huna said in the Sugya Daf Daled about schach tachas schach, or sukkah tachas sukkah, if you want to call it that. The problem is, what do we do with the other 2 opinions? One that says 4 tefachim and the other, Shmuel, says 10 tefachim. The Tosfos says something very ambiguous, that Shmuel is going to have to admit that in this context, Rav Huna is right, and all you need is a halal of 1 tefach. But Tosfos doesn't really analyze it. So if we had time for an Ian shit, which we don't have, we would have to find what we call in brisk svei dinim. You know, there are 2 different dinim over here. There's one din of schach tachas schach, and another din of a shem schach, because it's mahil. And in that case, as far as that din is concerned, to give the schach a din of mahil, all you need is a halal tefach, and even Shmuel would agree. But in schach tachas schach, you need that you're setting up 2 different sukkahs. And to set up 2 different sukkahs, you need, according to Shmuel, a separation, an airspace of 10 tefach. And that leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Tes Zayin. Hamishalshel defanos milamala lamata But what does this mean? Hamishalshel defanos. If you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, Kol mishalshel lemata kori shilshel. Yeah, I'm a little bit desperate. If you want to do me a big chesed. So Rashi says, Kol mishalshel lemata kori shilshel. This is based on a Gemara in Masechet Eruvin, in terms of the terminology of the Mishnah, mishalshel. So this Mishnah is going to address the issue of creating a mechitza that could serve as a dofen of sukkah. So we're no longer talking about schach. Now we're at a transition, and we're talking about defanos. We're talking about mechitzos. And what we're going to analyze in this sugya is to what extent we can compare the requirements and the definitions of mechitzos in Shabbos and in Eruvin to the definition of mechitzos and defanos in Sukkah. Now we're talking in the Reish of the Mishnah about a case of milamala lemata. And here we're going to introduce a concept which is called God, just one second, achis mechitzos. What do I mean? Because it's God, achis mechitzos, God, asik mechitzos. We always have to get it clear. Achis means to go down, and asik means to go up. What happens over here? He has a mechitza that's coming from the top of the sukkah going down, but it doesn't reach the ground. And the Mishnah says that if the distance between the bottom of the mechitza as he goes down, Rashi calls it ariga, and although the word ariga literally means weaving, it's very hard for me to believe that Rashi is using it in its technical sense as weaving, because I don't know how you'd weave a mechitza, going top to the bottom. I think ariga means the way he structures it. So it's going from the top to the bottom. But unfortunately, he left an opening area of 3 tfachim from the ground to the mechitza. Okay, thanks. Just want to thank my wife for bringing me the glasses. I'm telling you, maybe Rabbi Rhodes was right, because almost everything I told you was Baal Peh, but how much can I remember of Rashi, Okay. Now, the problem is that in order to see this dofen of a sukkah as kosher, it's got to cover and circle around the halal of the sukkah. Now, if it's gavoa asara, now Baruch Hashem we can read the Rashi. Take a look at Rashi, Dibra Maskil, Shlosha Tfachim Psula. Rashi says, Dahainu Kadeshi is Dakir Agdi Bavas Rosh. So we have a shear of an opening, a pirza, what's called a pirza, Pei Yud Reish Tzadi, a pirza in a dofen. And the pirza is such, if it's on the bottom of the dofen, that a small kid, KID, could easily go with his head and enter into that area, into that halal, into that sukkah in this case. Such a pirza completely undermines the status of the dofen, and it's psula. However, the Mishnah implies that if the dofen, if this dofen that he's mimishalshel, milamal reaches a little below 3 tfachim, it's 2.99 tfachim from the ground, then it's a mechitza. And if it's not Kedeshi is Dakir HaGedi Bas Rosh, then it's kosher. Now the Mishnah addresses the opposite scenario. Im gavoa asara tfachim kshera. I'm sorry, I skipped 2 words. Sorry. Milamata lemala. Now he's, so to speak, weaving his dofen, his mechitza, from the bottom, from the ground level, all the way on top. But it doesn't reach the top of his sukkah. It's not at a 90-degree angle touching the schach of his sukkah. So there's airspace between the dofen and the schach. In such a case, the Mishnah paskins that im gavoa asara tfachim kshera. All you need is an amazing halacha, is 10 tfachim in height. I couldn't care less how high the schach is. Again, it can't be 20 amma, but up to 20 amma, there's a tremendous gap between the dofen going up and the top of the schach. We're going to apply an imaginary dofen, which is called god asik mechitzos, and it's kosher. Second, I apologize. I just want to make sure I'm using the right terminology here. Oh, we're talking about milamata lamal. So I'm sorry, if I said go to achis mechitza, I stand corrected. I forgot what I said. But what I meant to say is go to asik mechitzos. Why? Because we're going milamata lamala. So let's go to asik. Asik means on the way up. So again, you have a dofen that's 10 tvachim high, I couldn't care less how much of an airspace there is between the top of the dolphin and the schach. The Mishnah Paskins, it's a kosher sukkah, and we're going to apply the principle of god asik mechitza. Imagining as if the dolphin went all the way up at a 90-degree angle and touched the schach. Rabbi Yossi Omer, kishem shemilamata lemala asar tvachim. Just like you apply the principle of god asik mechitza is going up, hach milamala lemata asar tvachim. We're going to apply the same principle, but in the reverse, not go to asik mechitzas, but go to achis mechitzas, going down as if there's an imaginary dolphin that goes all the way down to the ground. From top to bottom. And what it means is that Rabbi Yossi is not interested. He's not gores. He doesn't care about Kadeshi is daker hagdi bevas rush. That does not create a pirza. And why not? Because the halach of god achis mechitzos gives me an imaginary mechitza as if it went all the way down. So I don't care about my friend Mr. Gedi. My father came from a shtetl called Plisa, where his family supported themselves with a goat. I couldn't care less about this little goat. But Rashi adds a very important point, which he gets from the Gemara, as we'll see. If you take a look at Rashi, Dibra Maskal Kach Milamal Lamata, Rashi says, Ukasavar Mechitza Tluya Materes. As long as the Mechitza has 10 Tfachim height, Materes. And that's a Mechitza Tluya. It's like literally hanging in midair. Obviously, it's being hung up by poles, but it doesn't reach the ground. And mechitza tluya is materes, it's ksheru. So again, we're not sure about the Tanakama if he's talking about a psul doraisa or not. This I don't know. Whether this shear of Kadeshi is dakir agdiba vasroch is a psul doraisa of pirza, I'm not sure, because the Rabbanan seem to clash with the principle of god achis mechitzos, which is doraisa. Or maybe there's a special halach in Sukkah that the pirza, or it's a doraisa halach. Could be it's a doraisa halach. And god achis mechitzas only applies when there's no kadeshi is daker rosh hakedi. Gemara says, "But my miflagi, what is the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama?" Mar savar mechitza tluya materes. According to Rabbi Yossi, you could have a mechitza that's suspended in midair, and you can apply the principle of god achis mechitzas to validate the dolphin. And this is a principle in Hilchas Shabbos of god achis mechitzos. And if it's good for Shabbos, if you remember the Gemara that we learned a few days ago, then Kol Shkein, it's good for Sukkah. Because in Shabbos, you need a mechitza doraisa to be matir tiltul. Otherwise, it would be Daled Amos and it was just a Rabim, and you chayav skila for that. So if a mechitza based on god achis mechitzos, argues Rabbi Yossi, is kosher to be matir tiltul and make it into a Rishus HaYochid Horaisa, how much more so Sukkah, which is only a mitzvah haseh, it's not a chayav skila. Umar Sovar, but the Tanakama holds that mechitza tluya eino materes, and apparently, in order to make any sense out of this line in the Gemara in the bottom of Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph, we have to assume that the Rabbanan are making a statement about Hilchot Shabbos, that a mechitza tluya is not a valid mechitza in Hilchot Shabbos, because if it was valid in Hilchot Shabbos, then Rabbi Yossi is 100% correct, called Kal V'chomer in Sukkah. But even in Shabbos, it's not valid. Now the Gemara is a little bit odd in the sense that the Gemara is now going to quote a Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin Adaf Pevov, and that Mishnah in Eruvin is dealing with the issue of mechitza tluya from a D'Rabbanan perspective, not from a Doraisa perspective. So let me explain as an introduction to this Mishnah in Eruvin. We have a number of chatzeros that spill into a common mavui, a common street, or alternatively, we have a number of batim, of homes, that share one common courtyard, one common chotzer. Now, this chotzer is surrounded by mechitzos, and therefore on a doraisa level it has the status of shusayachim. There's no problem in carrying out into the chotzer, or for that matter, in carrying from one chotzer, one bias to another bias, because from one Rosh Hashanah to another Rosh Hashanah, the Torah allows it. But the Rabbanan said that once you're leaving your confines of your bias, going into another Rosh Hashanah, it looks like you're entering into Rosh Hashanah, and therefore we're going to consider it as if it's a Rosh Hashanah in order to require an Eruv. And that's called an Eruv Chatzeros, and they take a mazon, they take well, let's say a loaf of bread, whatever it might be, and they put it into one house amongst the many houses that share that same common courtyard. Whichever house it is, it's irrelevant. Now we have a case where it's impossible to make an Eruv Chatzeros. What's the case? You have a bar, a cistern of water, that's right in the middle between two chatzeros. And they put up a partition, a mechitza, that goes right down the middle of the bar so that Reuven has access to his side of the bar, Shimon to his side of the bar, with a mechitza in between Reuven and Shimon, right down the middle of the chatzer. And Rashi explains why it's impossible in this circumstance to create an Eruv Chatzeros. Rashi says, this is the first of the wide lines in the bottom of Rashi. The Ein Pesach Beineim La'arev Zu Im Zu. You can only make an Eruv Chatzeros when there is an opening in the mechitza that separates the two Chatzeros. If the partition that separates the two Chatzeros is unimpregnable, in other words, you can't go from one side to the other, then Eruv Chatzeros is meaningless, because Eruv Chatzeros, the goal of Eruv Chatzeros is to combine and integrate the two Chatzeros together, which you can't do because Rashi says Ein Pesach Beineim. So you can't make an Eruv. So now we have another principle here that's very important in the Gemara and Eruv, which is called Eruve Mayim. And that you'll see in Rashi on the second of the wide lines. He says, Leficha Meimei Chata Zu Mevi Lezu. The water goes from one side to the other. It means that the mechitza is on top of the bar. It's not separated below the surface level of the ground down to the bottom of the bar where the water is. And the water now is traveling back and forth from Reuven's side to Shimon's side. So the Mishnah says, Bar shebein shtei chatzeros ein memala mimenu b'Shabbos, elam kein asol ha'mechitza asarat tfachim. Now he's got to add another mechitza. Where is the second mechitza? He already has a mechitza on top of the bar. Now he needs a second mechitza that is inside the bar. Okay, now here we're going to have a machlokus, exactly how deep does this mechitza of 10 tvachim, how deep does it go down? Bein milamala, bein milamata, bein betoch ogno. Right, ogno is the rim around the bar. Is Rab Shimon Gamliel Omer,